3 days. 3 days is how long version 3 was up before EA dropped title update 11. 3 measly days of fun on career mode before it was back to the drawing board to work on version 4. Version 4 is here though. I'm still undecided about whether this most recent title update is ultimately good or bad for the game. It's improved things in certain areas, but it's made them worse in others. So in this video, we'll briefly go over what's changed since title update 11, and then we'll break down the new version 4 sets. As always, version 4 is designed for use of manual controls, but like I did with version 3, I've created 3 separate sets: a standard version, a harder version, and an assisted version. So however you like to play, there should be a set here that you can enjoy. One of the big things that changed with this update is that games are now a lot more open and a lot more stretched. CPU teams are now far more direct in their attack and play, and games can become too end-to-end at times if you try to match them. There's also a distinct lack of variety in CPU teams' attacks. They dribble down to the byline, walk into the penalty area whilst your defenders just bounce off them, and then they'll either shoot or cut it back. There's very little variety in the goals that the CPU is able to score as well. If they're not scoring from the byline shield dribble, they're tapping the ball into an empty net after a lucky deflection in the penalty area whilst your defender just refuses to clear it. And then the new one that's appeared with the update is the unstoppable rocket into the top corner. Basically every goal I conceded immediately after the patch was one of those 3 things. And then finally, a big problem is the lack of defensive awareness, particularly amongst user defenders. They'll just let strikers slip by them or take up positions in dangerous areas and basically do absolutely nothing to challenge them. So with those things in mind, the first thing we needed to do for version 4 was to rebalance the line height, length and width. We needed to condense and compress the midfield again and create those scrappy dynamic battles for possession in midfield. We also needed to increase the marking to make the game tighter and reduce run frequency to further discourage that end-to-end style of play and encourage more patient build-up. These things apply to both the user and the CPU. And then to encourage a little more attack and freedom and variety, we needed to lower the error values just for the CPU. So here's what those changes look like in terms of the user. Line height can remain at 50, but line length needs to come down to 42, and line width needs to come down to 48. The line length adjustment in particular means the midfield and defensive lines stay closer together, which not only makes the user team more difficult to break down, but also gives a little more cover on the edge of the penalty area to minimize the lack of awareness that the user defenders have. Raising marking also helps with each of those 2 things, making the game tighter and encouraging user defenders to track runners into space. Another advantage of raising marking is that there's more physicality in midfield. It encourages players to get into each other a little bit more and attack the ball. And this also leads to a few more fouls, which is never a bad thing. And then it's necessary to lower run frequency to generate a more patient style of play by default. This can obviously still be addressed in team tactics, and it is still possible to play a more direct counter-attack style. It just means you have to actually opt to play that way, rather than it just being the default way your players are programmed to behave. Beyond that, I just bumped injury severity up 1. I'm still trying to find the perfect balance with the injury sliders, but there just weren't enough players missing games at 19. And those are all the changes that needed to be made for the user. We haven't adjusted many of the user sliders, but the ones that we have adjusted are the significant ones that drastically change the foundation of a set and the structure of the game. And then we've changed a little bit more for the CPU. Firstly, we made the same adjustments to line height, length and width, matching the user at 50, 42 and 48 respectively. Because the game is more open by default after the most recent update, you no longer want that disparity in line height. And we've also raised CPU to marking to 70, which also matches the user. Run frequency needs to be lowered for the CPU as well, but not quite as much as for the user. So that comes down to 20. As the user, we have an additional option available to us, as we can manually instruct our players to make runs and even tell them where to run. And we have that in addition to the AI logic. Because the CPU team only has its own AI logic to utilize, there needs to be a slight disparity in run frequency to make up for that and level the playing field, basically. Setting both values to 15 leads the CPU to having more possession and more passes completed, but ended up taking half as many shots because players simply aren't being proactive in making forward runs to create chances. Lowering pass error to 68 encourages the CPU to play some more risky passes too, and this facilitates a little more attacking variety. The much higher value here was necessary in the last version to discourage the tiki-taka style that all the CPU teams would play, but that's now been addressed in the actual update itself. Now, having the pass error value too high simply just discourages CPU players from trying to thread balls through, and this is what leads them to just dribbling down to the byline and shielding the ball. They just don't trust themselves to do anything else. And then a similar thing applies to the shot error value. Having this as high as in the previous version is what was leading to the CPU just taking the same shots on over and over again, and it killed any variety in their attacking play. Lowering this all the way to 50 gives them the confidence to try a wider range of attacks. However, lowering this value also means it's necessary to lower the shot speed, and these two changes mean you should no longer see the ball just flying into the top corner every other time the CPU score. And then finally, I bumped injury severity up to 20, just as I did for the user. So here's the full set for version 4. I've called it version 4 because we may not have changed a lot of the values, but the values we have changed significantly alter the foundation of the set, and we've also adjusted those values fairly drastically. Version 4 is by no means the finished product. I'm sure there'll be values that change slightly as we play more games, increase our sample sizes, and experiment with refining certain values, but I think it's a good foundation to build from. Set's been playing smoothly for me. The midfield is an absolute war zone, and I've been scoring some really satisfying and realistic goals. If I do make any adjustments in the future, I won't be uploading a new video each time. I tend only to do that when an update drastically changes things, or if there are things that need to be explained in detail. Instead, I'll post any minor changes in the community tab, in my thread on the Operation Sports forums, and in my Sim Sliders subreddit, each of which you can find a link to in the description. I've also contemplated starting a Discord server, so let me know if that's something that you'd be interested in joining. For those of you that are enviably good at the game and need even more of a challenge, this harder set should be more your speed. You want to keep the structure of the game the same in terms of line height, length, and width, but bumping marking to 75 for both the user and the CPU will make the game even more tightly contested, and raising run frequency to 25 for the CPU will encourage a more relentless, direct style of play that you really have to work hard to defend against. You'll also want to raise first touch control error to 50 and adjust some of the error values. So raise shot error to 50 for the user and lower pass error to 50 for the CPU. And then finally give the CPU goalkeeper a boost to 35 and raise CPU pass speed to match the user at 36. If this still isn't hard enough for you, then find a new game because you've completed this one. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this set is designed for use with manual controls. If you don't know what manual controls are, I spoke in some detail about how to set them up and why I think it's important to use them in the last video, which you can find here. If you already know all about manual controls and you simply don't want to use them, you can still use these sliders, but there are some values that you'll need to change. Everything that contributes to the shape and structure of the game can remain, so that includes the line values, marking, run frequency, etc. All of the CPU values can also remain the same as in the standard set. However, because your inputs are being adjusted and modified by the AI, you'll need to raise the user error value significantly. So bump user shot error all the way up to 78, pass error all the way up to 70, and bring user pass speed down to 34 to match the CPU. You'll then also want to raise user first touch control error to 50. And there you have it, 3 brand new sets of sliders that should help you get those FC24 career modes back on track, no matter how you like to play. As always, if you're new to the channel and you like realistic career mode content, please take a second to subscribe. Also, it doesn't hurt to leave a like before you go. And if you do plug these in and try them out, make sure to come back and let me know how they play. And finally, if you want to see these sliders in action, keep an eye out for a brand new career mode series that's coming to the channel shortly. I'm really excited for this one, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But that'll do it for this video. Hope to see you in the next one. Take it easy.